This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. This show is dedicated to all the people who aren't verified on Twitter. In tonight's show, we break down why summer didn't slow down COVID-19 and what changing weather might mean for the virus. Plus, we'll take a closer look at the Twitter hack that targeted public figures and companies. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Across the US, 39 states are dealing with rising COVID case numbers. That includes virus hotspots like Texas and Florida, which has seen the daily death toll rise above 100 for the first time in the past week as hospitals reach capacity.
We're at double the number of COVID patients that we were in March, April. We're at the highest level of hospitalization that we've seen throughout this pandemic. We're at the highest level of ventilators that we've seen through this pandemic.
Meanwhile, some conservative leaders are pushing back on local level laws around the virus. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed an executive order that does away with any local mask mandates across the state. That's despite support for mask mandates from many public health experts and local leaders. Some businesses are taking matters into their own hands. This week, Walmart announced all of its stores and all Sam's Clubs will require masks. Kohl's and Panera made similar moves as well. Russian hackers could be working to steal COVID-19 vaccine research. That's according to allegations from the UK, US, and Canada. The hackers were identified as a group known to be a part of the Russian intelligence service. Britain's National Cybersecurity Center doesn't believe any information was actually stolen, but called the repeated attacks malicious activity. And the National GOP convention in Jacksonville, Florida next month is still on, but if it does happen, it'll definitely be scaled back. That's according to a letter sent by the Republican National Committee chair today. About 2,500 delegates will be allowed to attend the first 3 nights, but more guests will be allowed on the final night when President Trump is set to deliver his acceptance speech for the Republican nomination. The event would start up August 24th. Wading into these summer months, health experts thought the warmer weather would slow the spread of COVID-19. I mean, warmer weather is less hospitable for influenza or the flu, so why not with COVID? Newsy's virology series has been breaking down the pandemic since day one. In the final installment, Shira Tarlow explores why the assessment about the seasonality of COVID-19 might have been off and what we're continuing to learn about the virus until this day.
Everyone loves to talk about the weather, especially when they're counting on that weather to counter the spread of a pandemic.
The virus survives better in colder and drier environments and does less well in warmer and more humid environments.
The virus is dying at a much more rapid pace, just from exposure to higher temperatures and just from exposure to humidity.
There's no guarantee that this particular coronavirus is going to diminish when the weather gets warmer, but I hope it does.
After COVID-19 dominated the spring, many political and public health leaders hoped summer would put the brakes on the pandemic, but that's not what happened.
Tonight, the record-smashing coronavirus surges. Arizona, California, Georgia, and Texas hitting staggering new single-day highs.
So why is that? And what role does the weather have in this pandemic? The idea that summer would stop the outbreak, known as seasonality in the scientific community, is based on what we already know about other, more common viruses.
And it's been known since medicine began that, epidemics are seasonal and viral diseases can be seasonal. I think it was first noted by Hippocrates that changes in the season, change our, outbreaks and the risk of disease and illness.
To get a clearer idea of this theory, let's look at the seasonal flu. At cold temperatures, this virus forms a rubbery outer coating that shields it as it travels from person to person. If it manages to reach the respiratory tract, this protective covering melts like an M&M, basically. Now a liquid, the virus can enter a cell and infect it. But at high temperatures, the virus's outer layer breaks down, similar to how fat dissolves in heat, and deactivates the virus. Dry conditions, meanwhile, cause viral droplets to shrink and evaporate into the air, where they may linger for hours. On surfaces, they can survive for up to 2 days. Humidity, on the other hand, causes them to swell. Eventually, the droplets become too heavy to float and drop to the ground, unable to reach another human host.
In the temperate climates in warmer weather in the summer, the temperature generally is higher and humidity is generally higher. And those two things independently tend to inactivate viruses.
This phenomena was studied for over 3 decades by the CDC. It found U.S. flu activity peaked during the fall and winter. Scientists can't say for sure that COVID-19 will act in the same way. At this point, it hasn't followed the pattern of seasonality, and that could be because it's a new virus.
You know, a brand new virus to which few people are immune can come and can spread at any time of year it wants to spread, and it'll spread just fine. It's only when you build up a certain amount of population immunity that tap on the brakes in the summer has a more profound effect.
There have been close to 13 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide, and most of the world's population remains susceptible to infection. Without widespread immunity, COVID-19 could become endemic, a disease that regularly comes back like the seasonal flu.
In a few years from now, we may end up with a seasonal pattern with this virus, like we have with other coronaviruses and influenza. But right now, I wouldn't expect it in the first summer.
So we just watched the latest virology piece from Shira Tarlow. We still have some questions for her, so we invited her in the loop. Shira, how's it going?
Hey, Christian, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Are you ready for a round of Explain This?
Yes, I'm very excited to be in the loop.
Perfect. All right, so we'll start with the first image. Could you please explain this?
Those are M&Ms. They relate to the story because it's a really easy way to kind of conceptualize how viruses sometimes work. That's kind of how the particles act. When they're in the air, they have this protective outer coating. When the virus goes from person to person, this outer coating remains intact, but once it reaches a human host, it kind of breaks down and melts, similar to how an M&M would melt in your mouth.
Let's move on to the second image. Can you please explain this?
The way this relates to this virology piece, the majority of states in the United States are seeing spikes despite having really warm, high temperatures. So this shows that despite hot temperatures, higher levels of humidity than normal, weather is just one factor, but not the whole story when it comes to transmission.
All right, so we'll move on to the last image. Can you please explain this?
In this image, we're seeing a pretty giant crowd of people getting together. And while being outdoors is considered to be better, as you mentioned in the piece, the virus really thrives in these cooler, drier temperatures. So think of the office that you're in right now. Don't get too worried, but you know, it's just you in there, but you're in the office, it's cooler, it's drier. If that office was packed, then that would be, the AC is blasting. That would be a pretty, hospitable environment for the virus to thrive. And when you're going outside, that changes. However, public health experts recommend that when you're going outside, you should still be social distancing and wearing a mask.
I was comfortable coming in here by myself, but thanks, you've totally removed that. I appreciate you, Shira, for joining us on In the Loop, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this in person sometime.
Thanks, EB.
When we're back, we'll stroll through Twitter's trending topics to see what else is going on in the world around us.
As coronavirus spreads across the country, you might be looking for ways to make sense of it all. Newsy is here to help with some deeper context, explaining and reporting on the pandemic. Virology, only on Newsy. Be informed, not influenced.
Asheville, North Carolina takes a historic step toward racial justice, and the curious science nerd inside of all of us says goodbye to a renowned author. Here's what's trending, starting with this. Earlier this month, we told you to look at the sun. Not directly, but we suggested you take a peek at NASA's time-lapse of our nearest star. Well, NASA's following up that offering with another hit, an even closer look at the sun. The first images of ESA and NASA's solar orbital were made available today, giving us the closest look we've ever had. The images were taken from about 48 million miles out and reveal campfires millions or billions times smaller than solar flares. Asheville, North Carolina is a lovely place, but it's not trending because it embodies the imagery James Taylor's been singing about for decades. It's trending because the city council there just recently approved a resolution calling for reparations for Black residents.
In my mind, this resolution is a first step in that it names a vast list of historical wrongs that have been perpetuated against the Black community up until this very day.
The resolution won't provide direct payments to Black residents, which is what's typically suggested when reparations are mentioned, but will provide money to programs promoting minority home ownership and business opportunities. Joanna Cole is trending because the author who created the Magic School Bus book series died at 75 years old. Cole created the Magic School Bus after Scholastic, the company that originally published the book series, brought her in to combine science and storytelling. The books have sold millions of copies, and there have been 2 different animated TV shows based on the books. Yesterday, the Twitter accounts of well-known public figures and companies were hacked with a message suggesting if you send some bitcoins to the provided address, they'll be doubled. Newsy's Sasha Ingber breaks down what we know about the hack and what the security implications could mean going forward.
The FBI is investigating Wednesday's Twitter hack, which led the accounts of Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, former President Barack Obama, and icons in business and entertainment to solicit money through Bitcoin. Leaders in cybersecurity say the wave of prominent account takeovers is diminishing trust in the platform.
The thing that people are using for authenticity, the verified accounts, the high-profile names, that was eroded. And that's the thing that we learned from the 2016 election that's most damaging, is this kind of inability to determine what's really happening on these social media platforms. And that was directly attacked last night.
The cyber attack began Wednesday afternoon, and Twitter quickly tried to shut it down. The company announced it locked certain accounts and limited the ability of users to post messages. Hours later, Twitter said it detected, quote, what we believe to be a coordinated social engineering attack by people who successfully targeted some of our employees with access to internal systems and tools. CEO Jack Dorsey called it a tough day.
It is such an odd attack to blow that kind of access on. Cybersecurity experts are wondering why this low-level type of obvious scam was used for such a powerful vulnerability.
The scheme garnered an estimated $100,000, but it's unclear who's behind it and how much information may have been stolen in the process. Fears abound that false information could be posted by verified accounts on Election Day.
If election administrators try to say, hey, here's when the polling station opens, or here's the address of the polling station and it's coming from the verified account, but it's really not, this could cause a lot of challenges.
You could drive a lot of voter suppression that way. You could drive a lot of uncertainty and unrest around, did my candidate win, even on a more local level. And this has actually led to riots in other countries, riots where people have died.
One account that appears to not have been breached, President Donald Trump's. That prompted Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri to ask Twitter for more information, including whether the president's account had been threatened.
It could be that there's more security. It could be that they just didn't want to commit like the kind of federal crime that would get, very serious consequences on their doorstep.
The FBI San Francisco division told Newsy the accounts appear to have been compromised in order to perpetuate cryptocurrency fraud. Cybersecurity experts say Twitter needs to step up its protections.
9 in 10 cyber attacks, over 95% of the damages around the world, begin with phishing. They're not doing enough. Today, Twitter doesn't use any advanced phishing capabilities to protect their staff from email-borne attacks. Anything is possible.
Sasha Ingber, Newsy, Washington.
I don't know how y'all feel about Twitter after yesterday's BS, but if you're not taking a voluntary break from the platform, hit us up and let us know what you think about the show using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. Like what you're seeing here on Newsy? Just remember, you can come back every evening for a full update on the day's top stories to get caught up on the news that matters most to you. All facts, no opinion. On your schedule, anytime you need us, every day. We're Newsy. Be informed, not influenced. Less than a month after the killing of George Floyd, video surfaced of another officer in Allentown, Pennsylvania, kneeling on a man's head and neck in an attempt to restrain him. The move looks eerily similar to the move that killed Floyd. The man in Allentown was later treated and released from the hospital, but Newsy's Kat Sandoval explains this incident points to a need to fund mental health responders.
We want to warn you, some of the footage in this video is graphic. Questions about police reform are spreading outside major cities.
We don't matter. Look
on his neck,
on his neck.
In Allentown, Pennsylvania, this video shows an officer forcefully using the same neck restraint used on George Floyd. It's also a move that's banned under Allentown's police policy.
Police officers are supposed to be trained to de-escalate situations, not to escalate situations.
Ben Crump, a civil rights lawyer representing George Floyd's family, says what happened in Allentown would not happen to a white man.
They wouldn't do what they did to George Floyd to a white person. They wouldn't do what they did to the young man in Allentown to a white citizen. What we're really saying is we want equal justice too, just like you all want as American citizens.
The Allentown Police Department released a 9-minute video without audio from another perspective. You can see 37-year-old Eduardo Borrero Jr., a Hispanic man, staggering to the ER. He violently vomits a few times. He teeters near the road, keeps his distance from officers. That's when an officer lifts him up and then kicks his leg to bring him to the ground. The white car in the frame belongs to the witness who captures the incident on camera.
I thought we met it.
The 9-minute video made it very clear that one of our neighbors was in distress, and rather than protecting and serving him, the police criminalized his pain. He was on his knees and he was begging. He ended up with a knee to his neck.
Community leader Hassan Batts organized protests after the incident. He demanded police accountability and more funding in community-based organizations. One such organization is Oregon's Cahoots.
My question is always just kind of, what if someone else? If medical staff had greeted him outside and asked him if he needed to come in versus officers being the first people to interact with him.
Ebony Morgan is a Cahoots crisis worker and a registered nurse in Eugene, Oregon. These workers don't carry guns, but rather provide an alternative first response for incidents involving mental illness, homelessness, and addiction. They've been working alongside the police for 30 years. Last year, they took on 24,000 911 calls. People with untreated mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement. Morgan said the image of a police officer can be triggering for some, so Cahoots uses other tactics to de-escalate a situation.
The component that helps us a lot is that the community trusts us because our only role is to help. We're trained to see people and their vulnerabilities rather than their threats, which is a direct opposition to our police department.
Community trust plays an important role, and that trust seems to be missing. The Allentown Police Department and the Lehigh County District Attorney are investigating, but they have yet to release the name or badge number of the officer who knelt on Borrero.
I do not think the Allentown Police Department is doing enough. Without releasing his name, that continues this pattern of mistrust between communities of color and law enforcement.
An affidavit obtained by Newsy says Borrero was charged with possession of drug paraphernalia, disorderly conduct, and public drunkenness, to the point he posed a danger to himself and others. A police press release said Borrero was released after he was treated.
And that says a lot. If this man was such a danger, if he was such a threat, why is it that he was released?
Borrero has had similar run-ins with the law. He has been charged 8 times since 2015 with public drunkenness or possession of drug paraphernalia. Kat Sandoval, Newsy, Allentown, Pennsylvania.
We're in the home stretch, folks. Here's to hoping you won't get served the same ad 3 different times before you're back.
The number of African migrants arriving at Mexico's southern border has soared. Immigration officials tag African migrants entering Mexico as apatrida, or stateless.
As we get closer to the start of the school year, health experts like Dr. Fauci have said whether and when to reopen depends on the location. While the Trump administration is strongly suggesting in-person learning, Newsy's Amber Strong reports that some school districts aren't waiting on a White House blessing to find their own solutions.
Despite demands from the president for in-person learning,
We have to open the schools, we have to get them open.
schools across the country are opting to go 100% virtual. Districts in LA, Nashville, Broward County, Florida, Atlanta, Arlington, Virginia, and Indianapolis are among a growing number that won't be returning to the classroom in person in the fall. But how it's carried out varies. In Arlington, Virginia, for example, students will begin online courses in September with the hopes of transitioning to in-person classes by October. There's a similar plan in Austin, Texas, a COVID-19 hotspot. The Austin Independent School District will go virtual for the first 3 weeks of the school year. The president says the decision to keep schools closed is politically motivated, but members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force say schools need to base reopening plans on what's happening in their area.
If you're in a situation where you're in outbreak mode, then you leave it up to the local individuals.
In an interview with Newsy, task force member Dr. Deborah Burks said children are often asymptomatic.
Children in general that don't have pre-existing conditions, aren't being treated for cancer or other medical conditions, actually do quite well with the virus. In fact, so well, most young adults, we don't even know that they're infected because they have no symptoms.
While that may be good for children, it's part of the concern among teachers who fear contracting the virus themselves. A new study from Kaiser Family Foundation found a quarter of teachers have a condition that puts them at higher risk of serious illness from coronavirus.
I love teaching. I love getting energy from students, seeing them grow and their families, but I don't want to jeopardize their lives, my life, or the lives of their families.
Cheryl Boast is a fourth grade teacher and the president of the Maryland State Education Association.
And I get questions every day from educators. Well, what if a student doesn't want to wear their mask? How is each student supposed to be in a shop class and I'm supposed to clean all the equipment? What happens if there's an outbreak?
Boast's group, along with the Baltimore Teachers Union and the Maryland PTA, sent a letter to Governor Larry Hogan and the state superintendent saying the lack of personal protective equipment and the challenges of enforcing social distancing are among the reasons to enact distance learning, at least in the beginning.
Instead of focusing our attention on PPE and masks and everything and get the computers and get the digital, let's focus on one thing. Then we can start transitioning groups at a time into an in-person once we make sure that all of those safety protocols and health protocols are put in place.
But she says even that takes funding to make sure students and teachers are properly equipped with computers and access to internet, something they struggled with in the spring. The American Academy of Pediatrics has repeatedly stressed the physical and psychological need for kids to be in the classroom. But it too says the answer is funding to cover everything from PPE to Medicaid. In a letter Wednesday, it called on Congress for help. Amber Strong, Newsy, Northern Virginia.
That's it for In the Loop. I've got to coordinate my masks and shoes for trips back and forth to the mailroom, but we'll be back Monday. Same time, same place. Don't go anywhere just yet, though. More top stories from Newsy are coming your way right now.